The year was 1995 when the first symbol appeared. It was a cold, gray morning in the coastal town of Harbor Point, a place once known for its postcard beauty and quiet streets. But on that day, as the fog lifted from the docks and the fishing boats drifted lazily in the bay, a gruesome discovery shook the town to its bones. A body was found just outside the old railway station, half hidden beneath the leaves, soaked in rainwater and blood. Carved into the wooden bench beside the victim was a small, perfect triangle, no larger than a child's hand. The police ruled it a targeted attack, perhaps personal. But no suspects were ever found, and no one could explain the triangle. There was no known symbol like it in any gang registry, no religious or political meaning they could link to. The case slowly went cold. 2 months later, a second body appeared, this time inside a public restroom near the ferry terminal. A man in his early 40s, stabbed multiple times, his wrists bound with nylon cord. On the wall behind him, painted in black spray paint, was another triangle, slightly larger this time, but identical in shape. Detective Marla Kerr, a 39-year-old investigator with a sharp mind and a skeptical nature, took over the case. She had worked small-time crimes most of her career, with only one murder case behind her, a domestic violence situation that had ended in tragedy. But something about the triangle killings stirred something deeper in her. They weren't just murders. They were messages. She didn't know to whom or why, but she felt it in her gut. Her investigation began methodically. She examined both victims' lives, digging into their histories, searching for connections. They came from different towns, different professions, different age groups. One was a retired school janitor. The other was a local dock worker. They had no overlapping addresses, no shared workplaces, no common acquaintances. It was as if they were chosen at random, and yet, the symbol remained. Soon, a third murder followed, this time a young woman found near a lighthouse that hadn't been used in decades. Her body was left beneath the rusted frame, her eyes closed peacefully, hands folded across her chest. A triangle, carved this time into a wooden panel above her head, marked the scene. The media picked up on the murders, calling the unknown killer the marker. The town panicked. Security camera sales soared, families moved away. Marla's department came under fire for having no leads. Press conferences turned hostile. Everyone wanted to know who was doing this, and why. What puzzled her most wasn't the violence. It was the symbolism. The triangle appeared not just as a pattern, but as a language. It varied in size, sometimes location, sometimes material, chalk, blood, paint, carvings, but it was always there. She brought in a semiotics professor from the university 2 counties over. He told her triangles represented stability, trinity, change, and sometimes portals. But none of it made sense when laid over blood. So Marla looked inward. She stopped trusting the systems and began building her own investigation. She cataloged each scene in obsessive detail, created maps and timelines, color-coded theories on her wall. Her apartment became a shrine to the case. Her friends stopped calling. Her sleep grew shorter. Coffee turned to whiskey, yet she pressed on. In her search, she stumbled upon something, an old police file from 1971, stored in a digital archive from the state's homicide unit. The case involved a series of disappearances in a coastal town 200 miles north of Harbor Point. 3 people had vanished without a trace, each one last seen near an abandoned railway station. No bodies were ever found. But tucked inside a grainy black and white photo of the second scene was a chalk drawing on a bench. She submitted the file to her superiors, but they dismissed it. The cases were too far apart in time and geography, and the symbol, they argued, was just coincidence. But Marla knew better. It was a pattern. A silent one, spanning decades, spreading across places like a dark constellation. Someone had been doing this for years. She spent the next year traveling on weekends, using her own money. She visited libraries, newsrooms, local historians, even conspiracy theorists. She found similar cases in scattered places, always separated by years, sometimes a decade. But in all of them, somewhere nearby was the triangle. She now believed the killer or killers weren't acting in a normal pattern. These weren't crimes of passion or profit. They were rituals, part of something much bigger, possibly intergenerational. The killer was hiding in plain sight, moving town to town, waiting years between killings to avoid detection. In 1997, 2 years after the first body was found, Marla received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a Polaroid photo of her own apartment building, taken from across the street. No message. No signature. Just the image. She checked the timestamp. It had been taken 2 days earlier. Her hands shook as she stared at the image. She hadn't told anyone about her latest lead. She hadn't published her theories, yet someone knew. She brought the envelope to her captain. A security team was placed outside her home for a week, but nothing happened. The investigation continued, but with fewer resources now. The town had other priorities, newer crimes, and public interest was fading. But Marla couldn't stop. She was in too deep. In her isolation, she returned to the photographs, the original crime scene images. She noticed something she had missed before. In each case, the triangle was placed in a position that pointed towards something: a door, a window, a shoreline, a tree. It wasn't random, it was directional. Perhaps it was marking a path. She overlaid the triangle symbols on a map of Harbor Point. With each triangle's tip pointing outward, she extended invisible lines into the landscape. Where they intersected, in the forest outside the town's northern border, was an old mining shaft sealed off since the 1930s. It was early autumn when she arrived at the shaft. The trees were yellowing, wind rushing through dry branches like whispers. The entrance was buried beneath decades of brush and vines. But there it was, a rusted sign, barely legible, and a collapsed wooden frame leading into the dark earth. She crawled in with a flashlight and a crowbar, heart pounding. Inside, the air was stale. The beam of light danced over walls stained with mildew. Then she saw them. On the far wall, faint and peeling from years of moisture, were triangles. Dozens of them, painted in different colors, sizes, some overlapping, some fading. This wasn't a crime scene, it was a shrine. Or a warning. Further inside, behind a fallen beam, she found a wooden box. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, old cassette tapes, and handwritten notes. The notes were in different handwriting styles, but all used the same strange phrasing references to cleansing, the angles, and watchers. It was a manifesto. A collection of thoughts from a group or person obsessed with geometry and ritualistic meaning. Marla left the shaft shaken. She reported her findings. The place was secured, catalogued, and studied. The case was reopened. But the discoveries raised more questions than they answered. There were no fingerprints. No names. Nothing that could tie the items to a specific person. By 2001, Marla had left the force. The stress, the obsession, and the constant surveillance, real or imagined, had worn her down. She moved inland to teach at a small college, trying to rebuild her life. But the case never left her. She still kept the triangle photos above her desk, now faded and curling at the edges. Then one morning she received another envelope. Inside was a picture of a playground in a city 3 states away. At the center of the sandbox, carved into the ground, was a triangle. No body, no blood, just the mark. The image confirmed what she feared. The killer was still active. Or someone had taken up the mantle. Maybe it had never been just one person. Maybe it was an idea, a belief passed along like a hidden religion. Something about structure, symbols, order through violence. She didn't know. She never would. Marla published a book in 2003 titled The Angles. It was part memoir, part case study, part warning. It was ignored by the public and dismissed by academics as a glorified true crime obsession. But some readers, quiet ones, contacted her. They had seen triangles too, in alleyways, on telephone poles, under bridges. By 2005, a decade after the first body in Harbor Point, the town had returned to normalcy. The triangle killings became a distant ghost, something children whispered about in school halls. But the case was never solved. No one was ever charged. And the killer's identity remained a mystery. Marla Kerr died in 2011, a heart attack in her sleep. Among her personal items was a locked file cabinet filled with maps, names, photographs, and letters. Dozens of towns were marked with dates and lines connecting them like a spiderweb across the country. Some of the notes were dated just weeks before her death. The final page in her journal contained only one sentence. The pattern is not the killer, it's the invitation. In the years since, new triangles have appeared. In alleyways, on barn doors, in bathroom stalls, always without explanation. No suspects, no arrests, no answers, only the mark. And the silence that follows.